The day we lost our child was the worst day of my life. A stillbirth. 2 words that carried a weight I never knew was possible. Holding my lifeless son in my arms felt like my soul had been ripped from my body. Everything I had hoped for, every dream I had for our family, crumbled in that hospital room. Emma sat beside me, her face pale and her hands trembling. She cried, but something about her grief felt off. Her tears didn't flow the way mine did, and her embrace didn't carry the desperation I felt. I told myself it was just her way of coping. Grief is different for everyone, I thought. In the days and weeks that followed, I tried to find solace in routine, sorting through the baby's room, packing away the tiny clothes we'd bought, and flipping through the ultrasound pictures that now felt like cruel reminders. Emma, on the other hand, withdrew. She spent hours out of the house, claiming she needed long walks to clear her head or time with friends to feel normal again. I excused it. We were grieving, after all, and everyone processes loss differently. If disappearing for hours helped her, who was I to stop her? I couldn't even manage to get out of bed some mornings. But as time went on, the distance between us grew. She barely spoke to me anymore, avoiding eye contact during dinner and keeping her phone closer than ever. It became a constant presence, buzzing with messages she'd glance at before quickly flipping it over or slipping it into her pocket. I tried not to think too much about it. Our lives had been upended. I convinced myself that grief was driving the wedge between us, not something darker. But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted. Still, I tried to salvage what little connection we had left. One evening, I suggested we sit together in the baby's room. Maybe we could talk about him, I said, my voice shaking, about how much he meant to us. Emma avoided my gaze, staring at the floor instead. I can't, she whispered before walking away. I was left sitting there alone, surrounded by memories of what could have been, wondering if I was the only one holding on to what we'd lost. The unease in my chest began to grow. Something wasn't right. In the weeks following our loss, Emma's behavior became harder to ignore. Her grief seemed more like avoidance, a deliberate effort to detach herself from me and the life we had shared. At first, I attributed it to the pain we were both experiencing. I told myself she needed time, that we both did. But her actions didn't align with someone consumed by grief. She began spending more time out of the house, her long walks stretching into hours. When I asked where she had been, her answers were vague. I needed to clear my head, or I stopped by a friend's. She never elaborated, and I didn't press, unwilling to add to the tension. Her phone became an ever-present barrier between us. It was always in her hand, or within arm's reach, the screen lighting up with notifications she would quickly dismiss. Calls would come in, and she'd step outside to take them, her voice low and hurried. When I asked who it was, she'd wave it off, saying, "Just someone from work." I wanted to believe her, but a nagging doubt had taken root in my mind. I started noticing other things, too. Changes in her appearance, subtle but undeniable. She began dressing more elegantly, even for simple errands. Her makeup, once minimal, was now meticulous. One evening, as she was getting ready to meet a friend for coffee, I couldn't help but ask, "Why are you so dressed up for coffee?" She glanced at me, her smile tight. "It's just nice to feel like myself again." I nodded, swallowing the unease rising in my throat. Then came the moment that shifted my doubts into something more tangible. I was sorting through some old files in the office, trying to distract myself from the heaviness of the house, when I found a crumpled receipt tucked under a stack of papers. It was from an upscale jewelry store, a purchase made just 2 weeks prior. I frowned, turning the receipt over in my hands. A gold necklace, engraved. My heart sank. I hadn't given her this, and she hadn't mentioned buying it for herself. Another receipt surfaced a few minutes later, this one from a high-end restaurant downtown. The date and time jumped out at me. It was the same night she had told me she was at a friend's house, grieving together. I sat back in my chair, the pieces clicking into place. The late nights, the secret of calls, the unexplained absences. All of it pointed to something I didn't want to admit. Still, I fought against the conclusion forming in my mind. It can't be what I think it is, I muttered to myself. Not after everything we've been through. But as much as I wanted to believe in her, the evidence was piling up. And with it came the sinking realization that I couldn't keep ignoring the signs. That night, as Emma lay beside me, her back turned, I stared at the ceiling, the receipts tucked away in my bedside drawer. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but fear held me back. What if my suspicions were true? What if the woman I had shared my life with, the woman I had mourned with, was betraying me? The questions swirled in my mind, each one heavier than the last. I closed my eyes, hoping sleep would come. It didn't. The unease gnawed at me like a slow-burning fire. The receipts, the late nights, the hushed phone calls. All of it pointed to one terrible possibility. I tried to convince myself I was overthinking, but the weight of suspicion became unbearable. I needed answers, no matter how devastating they might be. The following morning, after Emma left for one of her walks, I called a private investigator named Paul. He came highly recommended, known for his discretion and efficiency. Explaining my situation to him was like admitting a deep shame. That I doubted my wife in our darkest time. I need to know the truth, I told him. Whatever it is. Paul nodded, his expression professional but sympathetic. You'll have your answers soon, he said. The days that followed were agonizing. Every time Emma left the house, my mind raced with possibilities. Was she really meeting a friend? Was she grieving alone? Or was she with someone else? Paul didn't take long to deliver his findings, though I dreaded the moment he did. When the call came, my heart felt like it might beat out of my chest. I've got what you need, Paul said. Can we meet in person? We arranged to meet at a quiet cafe. As I sat across from him, my hands shook slightly and I struggled to keep my composure. Paul slid a folder across the table. I'm sorry, but it's exactly what you feared. I stared at the folder, my stomach churning. When I finally opened it, the photos inside were like daggers to my heart. There she was, Emma, smiling, laughing, holding hands with another man. They looked so at ease, so carefree, as if they had no idea the destruction they were causing. This is Ryan, Paul said, pointing to the man in the photos. He's been seeing your wife for several months now. I didn't speak, unable to tear my eyes away from the images. There's more, Paul continued, his tone hesitant. He pulled out another set of documents. Ryan isn't just anyone. He's a known con artist, involved in multiple scams. He targets wealthy or financially stable women and uses them for money. I blinked, trying to process what I was hearing. A con artist? Paul nodded. He's charming, manipulative, and very good at what he does. He's been living off women like Emma for years. As if the betrayal couldn't get worse, Paul handed me one final envelope. Inside were medical records, Emma's medical records. My eyes scanned the page, stopping at one devastating line. Positive pregnancy test. She's pregnant, I whispered, the words barely audible. Paul nodded. Yes, but based on the timeline and her relationship with Ryan, it's not yours. I stared at the documents, my world crumbling around me. The woman I had shared my grief with, the woman I had trusted and loved, had not only betrayed me but was carrying another man's child. The betrayal wasn't just emotional. It was physical, tangible, and utterly devastating. Paul placed a hand on my shoulder, his voice gentle. I know this is a lot to take in. If you need more time or help moving forward, I can assist. I nodded numbly, barely hearing him. My mind was a whirlwind of pain and anger, the images and revelations replaying over and over. When I finally left the cafe, I didn't go home. I couldn't face Emma, not yet. Instead, I drove aimlessly, trying to make sense of everything. How had it come to this? How had the woman I thought I knew become a stranger capable of such cruelty? By the time I pulled into the driveway hours later, the house felt foreign, like a hollow shell of the life we had once built. Emma was in the living room, scrolling through her phone, completely unaware of what I had discovered. I didn't say a word to her that night. I couldn't. Instead, I sat in the dark, clutching the folder of evidence, the betrayal sinking in deeper with every passing moment. The devastation weighed on me for days, leaving me in a haze of anger, heartbreak, and disbelief. The woman I had shared my life with, the mother of the child we lost, had betrayed me in the most profound way. And Ryan, the man who had entered our lives like a shadow, was nothing more than a predator feeding off her vulnerabilities. I could have confronted Emma immediately, could have unleashed my fury and demanded answers, but what would that accomplish? She would deny it, twist the truth, or worse, blame me. No, confrontation wasn't enough. I needed something bigger, something permanent. I began to channel my anger into action, combing through the evidence Paul had provided. Each piece of information was like a puzzle piece, revealing a man who had perfected the art of deception. Ryan wasn't just a smooth-talking con artist. He was a master manipulator with a web of lies that stretched far and wide. Bank records showed a pattern of embezzlement and fraudulent transactions. Emails uncovered by Paul detailed fake business deals, promises of high returns, and desperate pleas from victims who had been swindled out of their savings. Ryan was a parasite, preying on women and clients alike, leaving destruction in his wake. The more I learned, the more determined I became to stop him. But this wasn't just about Ryan. It was about Emma too. She had made her choices, betraying our marriage and the life we had built together. She would face the consequences as well. Late one night, unable to sleep, I sat at the dining table with the folders spread out in front of me. I stared at the photos of Emma and Ryan, their laughter frozen in time, and a plan began to take shape. I wouldn't just confront them, I would expose them. First, I reached out to Martin, one of Ryan's victims whose name had surfaced in the investigation. Martin owned a series of high-end lounges and restaurants, one of which had been a backdrop for Emma and Ryan's romantic escapades. Ryan had conned him out of a significant investment, promising lucrative returns that never materialized. "Martin, my name is Nathan," I said when he picked up the phone. "I believe we have a common enemy." The conversation that followed was both cathartic and strategic. Martin's anger mirrored my own, his voice shaking as he recounted the ways Ryan had manipulated him. "If there's a way to bring him down, I'm in," he said firmly. With Martin on board, I began coordinating the next steps. He offered to provide access to his lounge, the very place Emma and Ryan frequented, for what would become the stage of their downfall. I spent hours compiling the evidence into a damning presentation. Photos of Ryan with Emma, recordings of his conversations mocking her and admitting to his scams, and financial documents exposing his fraudulent dealings were all meticulously arranged. Every detail was designed to destroy the carefully curated facade he had built. But it wasn't enough to expose Ryan alone. Emma's betrayal needed to be addressed too. I included snippets of her lies, her role in their deceit, and the undeniable proof of her infidelity. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my dignity and ensuring they couldn't hurt anyone else. The final piece of the puzzle was timing. I needed the perfect opportunity to strike, a moment when Emma and Ryan would be at their most vulnerable. That opportunity came when Emma told me she was going out for a girls' night. Her casual lie stung, but I hid my reaction, feigning indifference as she left the house. As I watched her drive away, I knew exactly where she was going. Martin had confirmed that she and Ryan had made a reservation at his upscale lounge to celebrate her pregnancy. His child, not mine. I stayed calm, rehearsing every step of my plan in my mind. This wasn't about acting on impulse or letting my emotions take over. It was about precision, about making sure every detail was perfect. Before heading to the lounge, I sent a message to Martin, "Be ready. Tonight's the night." By the time I arrived, my nerves were steady. I handed the USB drive to the lounge's manager, who was in on the plan, and instructed him to play the video on the venue screens after the couple finished their meal. "This is for a special surprise," I told him, my voice calm and composed. He nodded, slipping the drive into his pocket. As I left the lounge and stepped into the night, a sense of resolve washed over me. Emma and Ryan thought they had fooled me, thought they could carry on without consequence. But by the time the night was over, their lies would be laid bare for everyone to see. The days leading up to the showdown at the lounge were a blur of preparation and meticulous planning. I knew the key to dismantling Emma and Ryan's facade was solid, undeniable evidence. I wanted them exposed, not just in the eyes of the public, but also in ways that would leave lasting consequences, legal, financial, and personal. I dove deeper into the information Paul had provided, focusing on Ryan's fraudulent schemes. Bank records showed a clear pattern of theft, money funneled from clients into offshore accounts, fake invoices, and sham businesses used to launder funds. Paul's investigation revealed that Ryan wasn't just targeting wealthy women, he was systematically destroying lives. But the most damning piece of evidence came from a recording Paul had managed to obtain. In it, Ryan spoke to one of his accomplices about Emma and his plans. "She's easy to manipulate," Ryan said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "She thinks I'm her savior, but really, she's just a stepping stone. Once the divorce settlement comes through, I'll make sure to get my share. She's too blinded by the idea of us to see what's really happening." Hearing his words ignited a fire within me. Emma wasn't just a victim of her own poor decisions, she was a pawn in Ryan's game. But her betrayal still cut deep. She had chosen him, trusted him, and betrayed me in the process. I compiled everything. Photos of them together, screenshots of financial transactions, emails between Ryan and his accomplices, and the recording of him mocking Emma. Every piece of evidence painted a damning picture, one that would obliterate any defense they might try to mount. Once I had everything organized, I worked with Martin to plan the reveal. Martin was just as invested in taking Ryan down, his anger at being conned fueling his determination. "We'll play it at the peak of the evening," Martin said during one of our meetings. "The lounge will be packed. Everyone will see it." "Good," I replied. "It needs to make an impact." I spent hours editing the presentation, ensuring that each piece of evidence flowed seamlessly into the next. I wanted it to be impossible to refute, a visual and auditory onslaught that would leave no doubt about Ryan's guilt and Emma's betrayal. The night before the planned reveal, I rehearsed everything in my mind. I pictured Emma and Ryan sitting at their table, basking in their delusions of triumph. I imagined their expressions as the truth unraveled around them, their laughter replaced by shock and horror. But this wasn't about revenge, not entirely. It was about justice, justice for the life they had destroyed, the pain they had caused, and the people they had manipulated. The morning of the reveal, I woke early, my nerves surprisingly steady. I went over the evidence one last time, ensuring there were no gaps or errors. Then, I contacted Paul to confirm that all the information had been securely backed up. "Are you ready for this?" Paul asked, his tone neutral but curious. "More than ready," I replied. Later that day, Martin called with a final update. "Everything's set," he said. "The screens are ready, and the staff knows to play the video when you give the signal." "Thank you, Martin," I said sincerely. "This means more to me than you know." He paused for a moment before replying. "Ryan deserves what's coming to him, and so does she." As evening approached, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. The pain and anger that had consumed me for weeks were still there, but now they were tempered by resolve. Emma and Ryan thought they could carry on without consequence, that their lies and betrayal would go unnoticed. Tonight, they would learn just how wrong they were. I left the house with the USB drive in hand, my steps steady and my mind clear. By the end of the night, the truth would be undeniable, and their carefully constructed world would come crashing down. The night had arrived. Emma's lie about her girls' night was the final thread in the tapestry of betrayal she and Ryan had woven together. I watched her leave the house, dressed to the nines, a faint smile playing on her lips. It wasn't just a smile of excitement. It was smug, as if she thought she had mastered the art of deception. But I knew where she was really going. Martin had confirmed the reservation earlier that day. She and Ryan would be celebrating her pregnancy at his upscale lounge, unaware that their secret was about to be revealed in the most public way imaginable. I waited an hour after Emma left before heading out. The USB drive containing the evidence was tucked securely in my pocket, every damning piece of information meticulously arranged. I drove to the lounge, my hands steady on the wheel, my mind sharp and focused. The lounge was a hub of luxury and sophistication, filled with patrons dressed in their finest. The soft hum of jazz music played in the background, mingling with the murmur of conversation and the clinking of glasses. As I walked in, the atmosphere felt charged, as if it were holding its breath for what was about to unfold. I approached the manager, who was already in on the plan thanks to Martin. He was a middle-aged man with a calm demeanor, but even he seemed intrigued by the unusual request. "This is for a surprise video," I explained, handing him the USB drive. "Play it on the screens after the couple at table 7 finishes their meal. It's a special celebration." The manager nodded, taking the drive without question. "Understood. It'll be done." I glanced across the lounge, spotting Emma and Ryan immediately. They sat at a corner table, laughing and sipping on champagne. Emma looked radiant, her hand resting on Ryan's as they leaned into each other. To anyone else, they might have looked like a couple deeply in love. To me, they were the embodiment of betrayal. I stayed at the bar, keeping my distance but never letting them out of my sight. I didn't need to hear their conversation to know what they were saying. They were probably talking about the future they were planning together, the life they thought they had secured by deceiving me. The bartender placed a drink in front of me, but I barely touched it. My focus was entirely on the couple at the corner table. Emma laughed, tossing her head back as Ryan whispered something in her ear. My jaw clenched, but I forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't the moment to act out of anger. I reminded myself why I was there. Not to yell or confront them, but to expose them. Eventually, the manager gave me a discreet nod, signaling that the video was ready to play. The couple's meal was winding down, and the moment of truth was near. I left the lounge quietly, stepping into the cool night air. I didn't need to stay to witness what was about to happen. The evidence spoke for itself, and the fallout would be swift and undeniable. As I drove away, a strange sense of calm washed over me. I had done everything I could to ensure that Emma and Ryan would face the consequences of their actions. The pain and humiliation they had caused me would now be theirs to bear. Tonight wasn't just about exposing their betrayal. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my strength, and my life. The lounge, with its ambient lighting and polished decor, was the perfect backdrop for Emma and Ryan's celebratory evening. They were seated at their corner table, laughing, toasting, and indulging in their delusion of triumph. Emma's radiant smile and Ryan's charming bravado painted the picture of a perfect couple, but their facade was seconds away from shattering. Inside, the manager moved with calculated efficiency. At the precise moment their dessert plates were cleared, he signaled the staff to play the video from the USB drive. The screens around the lounge, usually reserved for soft visuals or serene landscapes, flickered and went dark. Then, the video began. At first, the patrons barely noticed, their conversations continuing in quiet murmurs. But as the first images flashed on the screen, a hush fell over the room. The opening sequence featured Ryan, his face unmistakable, as he laughed and bragged about his scams in a recording Paul had uncovered. "These people are so easy to manipulate," Ryan's voice echoed through the lounge. "They trust you with everything. Money, secrets, everything. And once you've drained them dry, you move on to the next." Gasps rippled through the crowd as the video transitioned to financial documents, showing bank accounts and fraudulent transactions tied directly to Ryan. The damning evidence piled up, each clip and image more incriminating than the last. At their table, Emma and Ryan froze, their laughter dying instantly. Ryan's expression shifted from confusion to alarm as he realized what was happening. Emma's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief. The video continued, this time revealing Ryan's recorded conversation about Emma. "She's easy to fool," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "She thinks I'm in love with her, but I'm just waiting for that divorce settlement to come through. Once she gets her cut, I'll make sure I get mine. After that, who knows? She's just another mark." The room erupted. Gasps turned to whispers. Whispers turned to murmurs, and murmurs escalated into loud accusations. Patrons turned to stare at Ryan and Emma, their faces filled with a mixture of disgust and fascination. Martin, the lounge's owner and one of Ryan's victims, stood from his seat near the bar. His voice boomed over the chaos. "That man is a thief. He conned me and dozens of others out of our savings." All eyes turned to Ryan, whose confident demeanor had crumbled entirely. He stammered, trying to explain, but the damage was done. Emma's face was a mask of horror as she looked from the screen to Ryan, then back to the crowd. Her hands trembled as she tried to process the betrayal unfolding before her. Before she could speak, the final piece of evidence played. Photos of Ryan and Emma together, laughing, holding hands, and celebrating her pregnancy. The crowd's judgmental stares now shifted to her. "That's the wife," someone whispered loudly. "She cheated on her husband for that con artist?" The whispers grew louder, blending with the sound of sirens in the distance. The police arrived moments later, tipped off in advance by Martin. Officers entered the lounge with purpose, heading straight for Ryan. "You're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and other charges," one of the officers said, pulling Ryan from his chair. Ryan protested, shouting, "This is a setup. I'm innocent." But the evidence on the screen said otherwise. As the officers cuffed him and escorted him out of the lounge, the crowd parted, their phones out to capture every humiliating second. Emma remained seated, her face pale and her eyes brimming with tears. She looked around the room, searching for an ally, but there was none to be found. The murmurs of disgust and judgment were deafening, a public condemnation of her choices. "Emma," someone muttered nearby, shaking their head. "How could she?" She stood abruptly, knocking over her chair, and fled the lounge, her heels clicking loudly against the marble floor. From my car parked a few blocks away, I watched the commotion unfold through a live stream posted by one of the patrons. The camera captured every detail, the crowd's reaction, Ryan's arrest, and Emma's shame. I didn't need to be there to feel the weight of the moment. Justice had been served, and their lies were exposed for all to see. As I drove away, a strange calm settled over me. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. The truth was out, and Emma and Ryan were left to face the consequences of their betrayal. The aftermath of that night at the lounge was swift and merciless. By the next morning, Ryan's arrest and the scandal surrounding it had become a viral sensation. Videos from patrons filled social media, showing him being handcuffed and dragged out of the luxurious venue. His fraud and manipulations were exposed to the world, leaving no room for him to slither away this time. News outlets quickly picked up the story, piecing together the evidence from the leaked video. Headlines like "Con Artist Arrested in Dramatic Lounge Sting" and "Betrayal and Scandal Unfold in High Society" dominated the media. Every sordid detail of Ryan's schemes came to light. His fraudulent businesses, the clients he had swindled, and even his calculated manipulation of Emma. Emma's name, of course, wasn't spared. The photos of her and Ryan, combined with the revelation of her affair, spread like wildfire. She became the subject of public scorn, her once polished image tarnished beyond repair. Mutual friends began reaching out to me, their tones ranging from awkward sympathy to outright disgust at her actions. "I can't believe Emma did this," one friend said over the phone. "She threw everything away for that guy?" "She's a mess," another confided. "She's been calling everyone, trying to explain herself, but no one's buying it. She looks like a fool." As for Ryan, his fall was complete. With Martin and other victims pressing charges, the weight of the evidence ensured he wouldn't see the outside of a prison cell for a long time. The authorities seized his assets, freezing his accounts and dismantling the false empire he had built. But it wasn't just his fraudulent dealings that left him cornered. The recording of him mocking Emma and openly admitting to using her sealed his fate. His arrogance had been his undoing, and now he was paying the price. Emma, on the other hand, was left to deal with the fallout alone. Without Ryan to cling to, she had no safety net. Her friends abandoned her, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. The whispers followed her everywhere she went, at the grocery store, in the neighborhood, even at the gym. "She's been humiliated," one mutual acquaintance told me. "People can't stop talking about what happened. I almost feel sorry for her. Almost. But I didn't feel sorry. Not after everything she had done." A few days later, Emma showed up at my house. I watched her through the window as she stood on the porch, her shoulders hunched and her eyes red from crying. She knocked softly at first, then louder when I didn't answer. "Nathan," she called out, her voice trembling. "Please, I just want to talk." I didn't move. She knocked again, this time more insistently. "Nathan, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Please, let me explain." Explain? What was there to explain? The evidence had spoken for itself. Her betrayal, her lies, her choice to side with a con artist. All of it was undeniable. I moved closer to the door but didn't open it. Instead, I leaned against the wall, listening as she continued to plead. "I made a mistake," she sobbed. "I was confused, and he manipulated me. I didn't know what I was doing. Please, Nathan, give me a chance to make this right." Her words were empty. There was no excuse for what she had done, no justification for the pain she had caused. Through the peephole, I watched as she sank to her knees, her face crumpling in despair. "I don't have anyone else," she whispered. "I need you." I closed my eyes, willing myself to feel something. Pity, anger, sadness. But there was nothing. Just a hollow indifference. Finally, I spoke through the intercom, my voice calm but firm. "You made your choices, Emma. Now you have to live with them." There's nothing left to say. Her sobs grew louder, her pleas more desperate, but I didn't respond. I walked away from the door, leaving her cries to fade into the night. That was the last time I saw her. The next day, I blocked her number, deleted her from my contacts, and ensured there were no remaining ties between us. I contacted my lawyer to expedite the divorce proceedings, making it clear that her infidelity would void any settlement she might hope for. Emma's perfect world had crumbled, and I felt no responsibility to help her rebuild it. The days after Emma's final visit felt like a strange mix of closure and emptiness. For years, my life had revolved around her, and while I had no regrets about shutting the door on that chapter, the quiet that followed was disorienting. The divorce proceedings were swift and decisive. The evidence of Emma's infidelity left no room for negotiation. My lawyer ensured that any potential claims she might have had on my assets were voided. When the judge finalized the divorce, a weight lifted off my shoulders. I stared at the signed documents in my hands, letting the reality sink in. It was over. The woman I had once loved, who had shared my dreams and my pain, was no longer a part of my life. Word of the divorce spread quickly among our social circle. Friends and colleagues reached out, offering their support and admiration. "You handled this with more grace than I ever could," one friend told me. "Most people would have let the betrayal destroy them," said another. "But you came out stronger. That takes real strength." I appreciated their words, but it didn't feel like strength. It felt like survival. I hadn't had the luxury of falling apart. I had to reclaim my life, piece by piece, to ensure Emma and Ryan's betrayal didn't define me. My first step was to focus on myself. I redecorated the house, removing every trace of Emma's presence. The furniture she had chosen, the photos of us together, the little trinkets she had collected over the years, all of it was gone. In their place were things that reflected me, books I loved, photos from my travels, and a calm, minimalist design that brought me peace. Work became a haven. I threw myself into my career, taking on new challenges and projects that reignited my passion. The distraction was welcome, but it also reminded me of my worth, something Emma's betrayal had tried to diminish. Beyond work, I began reconnecting with old friends and forging new relationships. I joined a local hiking group, rediscovering my love for the outdoors. The simplicity of walking through nature, breathing in fresh air, and pushing my physical limits was therapeutic in ways I hadn't expected. But the most significant change was my mindset. I stopped seeing myself as a victim of Emma's choices. Instead, I began viewing this chapter as a lesson, a painful but necessary one. Her betrayal had taught me the importance of self-respect, boundaries, and the strength to walk away from those who don't value you. Occasionally, I heard updates about Emma through mutual acquaintances. Her life had spiraled after Ryan's arrest. She lost the friends who once surrounded her, unwilling to associate with the scandal. Her finances were in shambles, and she was forced to take on a low-paying job just to make ends meet. "She's a shadow of who she used to be," one acquaintance told me, but I felt no satisfaction in hearing about her struggles. It wasn't my burden to carry anymore. Emma's choices had led her to this point, and it was up to her to face the consequences. One evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset, I reflected on how far I had come. The pain of losing my child, the betrayal that had followed, and the heartbreak of divorce were still part of my story, but they no longer defined me. The man I had become was stronger, wiser, and more self-assured. I had faced the storm and come out the other side, not unscathed, but whole. The chapter with Emma was officially closed. As I raised a glass to the fading light, I made a quiet promise to myself. The next chapter would be written on my terms, free of deceit and pain, and filled with the peace I had fought so hard to reclaim. With the divorce finalized and the ghosts of betrayal firmly behind me, my life took on a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The pain that had once consumed me now felt like a distant echo, a reminder of how far I had come. The house, now fully transformed, had become a sanctuary. Each room was a reflection of the man I was becoming, a man no longer defined by the shadows of his past. Where once there were traces of Emma's presence, now there were symbols of freedom and resilience. The living room was adorned with photos from my recent travels, snapshots of mountain ranges, serene lakes, and sunsets that seemed to stretch forever. Travel had become a cornerstone of my healing. With no ties to hold me back, I ventured to places I had only dreamed of visiting. A week-long hiking trip in the Rockies left me breathless, not just from the altitude but from the overwhelming beauty of nature. A quiet retreat to the Amalfi Coast reminded me of the simple joys of life: good food, warm sunshine, and the gentle rhythm of the sea. But healing wasn't just about adventure. It was also about connection. I reconnected with old friends, people I had drifted away from during my marriage. Dinners and late-night conversations reminded me of the support I had always had but hadn't leaned on enough. One of those connections led to an unexpected new chapter. At a gallery opening, I met someone who would change everything. Her name was Lauren, a local artist whose work was as vibrant and authentic as she was. Our first conversation flowed effortlessly, and her curiosity about the world was infectious. Lauren wasn't interested in appearances or status. She valued depth, honesty, and kindness. She didn't pry about my past, instead choosing to focus on who I was in the present. As the weeks turned into months, Lauren became a steady presence in my life. She reminded me of what love could be: uncomplicated, genuine, and filled with mutual respect. She didn't try to fix me or fill the gaps left by Emma. She simply walked alongside me as I rebuilt myself. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, she turned to me with a smile. "You've been through so much," she said softly, "but you're stronger because of it." Her words struck a chord. I realized she was right. The betrayal, the loss, the heartbreak, they hadn't broken me. They had shaped me into someone resilient, someone who could stand tall no matter the storm. The scars Emma left were still there, but they no longer hurt. Instead, they served as reminders of my journey, of the strength I had found within myself, and the peace I had fought to reclaim. I occasionally heard whispers about Emma's life. She was still struggling, trying to rebuild after the fallout of her choices. I didn't feel anger or satisfaction, just a quiet detachment. Her story was no longer part of mine, and I was at peace with that. Lauren and I took things slow, allowing our relationship to grow naturally. She introduced me to her world of art, teaching me how to see beauty in the unexpected. In turn, I shared my love of hiking and photography, and together, we created new memories, ones untainted by the past. As I stood in my home one evening, looking out at the city lights, I realized how far I had come. The man staring back at me in the window's reflection wasn't just a survivor of betrayal. He was someone who had learned to thrive. The pain Emma and Ryan had caused was no longer a weight on my shoulders. Instead, it had become the foundation for a stronger, wiser version of myself. Raising a glass to the future, I made a quiet vow: to live fully, to embrace joy, and to never settle for anything less than respect and love. This was my new beginning, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free.